What we're going to do for the second video is we're going to look at our other problems that we didn't get to finish. Looking at method 1, what we're going to do is we're going to look for our GCF. So looking at letter D, our greatest common factor for the two terms would be 5. And what's left over is x plus 6. When we're looking at letter E, we're going to factor out a 7x. What's left over will be an x minus 2. And letter F, when we're looking at this, we notice that they both have an x squared in common. So we factor out an x squared, and what's left over is x plus 1. Now that's finding the greatest common factor. The other one with two terms is going to be the special factoring pattern. When we're looking for the special factoring pattern, what we're going to do is we're going to take the square root of each of the terms. And so what we're left with is x minus 2 and x plus 2. For letter E, we do the same thing. We take the square root of each of them, and that gives us x minus 10 and x plus 10. Looking at letter F, we do the exact same thing. We're taking the square root of each of the terms, and that gives us 9x minus 1 and 9x plus 1. So that right there brings us to our problems that have 3 terms. So we're looking at our third method, which is the x method. And when we're looking at this, we're looking for two numbers that multiply together, give us -8, add up to -2. That would be -4 and 2. So our answer is x minus 4 and x plus 2. Now looking at letter E, because there's a leading coefficient, we're going to multiply the 3 and the 4, and that right there is going to give us a 12 on top and -8 on the bottom. So the two numbers are -2 and -6. We're going to take each of those numbers, and because there's a leading coefficient of 3, we're going to divide each of them by 3. When we divide it by 3, what we get is 3x minus 2 and x minus 2. Looking at letter F, we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to multiply the 2 and the -15. We put that on the top. So two numbers that multiply together give us -30, add up to 7. That would be 10 and -3. Now, before we write it down, remember there's a leading coefficient of 2, so we divide each of these by 2. That gives us x plus 5 and 2x minus 3. That brings us to our fourth method. And for our fourth method, we could either have 2 terms, or what we could do is we could have 3 terms. Because the answers are the same, we're not going to do D, E, and F. We're just going to focus on A, B, and C. So looking at this right here, we're going to start off with our greatest common factor. The greatest common factor for both of those would be 2x. Then what we're left with is x minus 4. Now, normally we would use a special factoring pattern, but notice that this right here is not squared. So that right there gives us our answer. We just stop right there. All we can do is find the greatest common factor. Now, if we're looking at our next method, notice that each of them have a 3 in common. So we factor out a 3, and we have an x squared plus 6x plus 9. Now, since we have a trinomial, we're going to use the x method. Two numbers that multiply together give us 9, add up to 6. Both of those numbers would be 3. So what we're going to do is we're going to put an x plus 3 squared, because both answers are the same, and we want to make sure we don't forget the 3 in the front. So we put the 3 in the front. Now for our last problem, when we're looking at it, we notice that each of them have an x in common. So we factor out an x, and we're left with x squared plus 6x plus 8. We're going to do the same thing as before. We're looking for two numbers that multiply together, give us 8, add up to 6. Those numbers would be 2 and 4. So what we have is x, and then x plus 2, and x plus